students. Today we are going to study a new chapter, that is how do organisms reproduce. So how do organisms reproduce? So before studying this, we should have the clear picture of reproduction. So what is this reproduction? Reproduction is nothing. It's the organisms which are able to give birth to the young ones. So every organisms, either you take a smaller or bigger organisms which are able to give production. So that is the which are able to give production to the new individual. So one organisms reproduce to a number of other organisms. So why organisms reproduces? Because to live in the nature. To live in the nature or to live in the environment, they have to reproduce. So it's a very basic necessity of every living organisms where they start give birth to the young ones. So we call it is a reproduction. So this reproduction is a life process. So if our process has to continue, if our process has to take place, this is one of the important essential method where organisms has to reproduce. So we have studied in the lesson life process. The other important processes just like excretion and nutrition and respiration and digestion. So unlike these processes, this reproduction is one of the life process essential for the survival of the living organisms. So this we are going to study in the lesson called as why do organisms reproduce. And secondly, organisms look similar, but there is a certain specific changes in the organism. So we can make out, and these changes are nothing. We call it is a variation. Variation means the changes which are taking place in the organism. So I do not look like another. I do not resemble like another. In me there are changes. So little changes or more changes are the essence of reproduction. So reproduction is nothing. Remember the basic definition of reproduction is giving birth to the young ones. Giving or reproducing or reproduction in the way where organisms are able to give birth to the young ones. And in the reproduction is the life process just like other processes. Excretion, nutrition, respiration and the digestion, and this is one of the essential of the life process. And in the reproduction we see certain changes in the organisms and we call it is a variation. So during the reproductions the organisms are able to reproduce. How? Because of the important genetic material we call it is DNA. So you know the abbreviation of DNA, that is deoxyribonucleic acid. So this deoxyribonucleic acid is nothing. It is a hereditary material where we are able to send the information by the cellular cells which are present in our body. Therefore DNA is very important. This is are able to get the exact copy of oneself through the reproduction. Therefore this reproduction takes place by the genetic material which is present in the organisms, that is we call it is DNA. It is deoxyribonucleic acid where the exact print of the individual can be obtained. Our own print, our own copy is we are getting by the molecule called as the DNA. Therefore, it is very essential for the survival of the individual. So this DNA is a hereditary material where organisms are able to give birth to the young ones. And during this DNA molecule, there is a certain changes and we call it is a variation. variation. So this variation is not essential for the individual species but for the group of organisms. For the survival of the entire species is essential for the individual species this variation. Therefore remember, variation may not be helpful for the individuals but for the survival of the entire species. Species means the group of organisms which they live in the environment. We call it as a species. So just remember students, the basic understanding of the concepts, how do organisms reproduce. Reproduction. So first you should know the definition of reproduction. Reproduction it is a production. It is a giving birth to the young ones. Giving birth to the young ones we call it is a reproduction. Just like the other life processes. This reproduction occurs how? Because of the hereditary material which we are called as the DNA. That is deoxyribonucleic acid. That is the cells which are present in our body, and these cells are able to give rise to the exact copies of another material. And during these copies we are going to get certain changes. Yava badalavanaಗಳು ಮಾನವನಲ್ಲಿ ಉಂಟಾಗುತ್ತೆ during the reproduction. We call it as a variation or changes. Changes in the organisms are very essential. One organism doesn't look like another. There is a little bit of changes we can be obtained and we call it as a variation. So this is the basic concept and this variation is very essential for the survival of the species in the organisms or species in the surrounding. So remember, this concept is very important. We are going to study the modes of reproduction. So remember, what are the modes of reproduction? How can you reproduce? There are two modes of reproduction. One we call it is the asexual reproduction and second one we call it is the sexual reproduction. So students remember, modes of reproduction takes place by two ways. That is called as the asexual. So we are going to study some types of asexual reproduction. How this asexual? So in the asexual organisms or asexual mode of reproduction, there are no cells. There are no sex cells are present. Therefore we call it as asexual. And this is only takes place in the some kind of organisms, either unicellular or multicellular, or in some kinds of plants. Some plants you can observe there is a mode of reproduction we call it is a asexual. And second we come to the sexual reproduction. So when we come to the sexual reproduction, there is a mostly it takes place in the sex cells. You know the sex cells, especially it is a sexual reproduction we study in the flowering plants as well as in the human beings. So first today we are going to deal with the asexual reproduction. So we are going to study some types of asexual reproduction. So first we are going to study about the term called as the first term called fission. Remember students, it is a very important concept. So what is fission? The word fission is nothing. It is a breaking. Fission means what? Breaking. Muriyudu. Getting broken into pieces. Therefore, the fission is nothing. It is the organisms get split. Remember, the organisms get split into two or more organisms. A very simple concept. Fission, the first form of asexual reproduction. Fission, where the organism is able to split into two organisms. And this fission is again divides into two. That is, first we call it is the binary fission and second we call it is the multiple fission. So remember the terms binary. Binary means two, multiple means many. Binary fission. So just that term. Binary, the organisms get broken. Organisms into two organisms. So, example for binary. The amoeba. Amoeba, you know, it is a unicellular. So, amoeba, what happens? Amoeba doesn't have definite shape, definite proportion it doesn't have. Therefore, it lives in the land, water, and it changes its shape. So, this amoeba, what happens? It gets split into two organisms and we call it is a binary fission. And second, we study multiple. Multiple means what? It gets broken into many organisms. Many. Example, we call it is the plasmodium. Plasmodium is a single cell, and in the single cell there are many cells which are formed due to the multiple fission. So, multiple fission means the organisms gets broken into number of cells. Example, plasmodium. So, remember students, the fission is nothing. It is the first form of asexual reproduction where the organism is able to split into number of cells. So, fissions are two types, binary fission and multiple fission. So, binary fission where the organisms is broken into splits into two, we call it is a binary. Example, amoeba, and second example, another one we call it is the leishmania. Leishmania is just like organisms where the body can be split into two types, and multiple where the organisms is broken into many, it is called as the multiple fission. So, many times these questions ask students what is the differences between binary and multiple. In the exams binary and organisms split into two, multiple and organisms can be split into many. And this takes place during favorable condition. Organisms can be split. So, we call it as a favorable conditions. The organisms is broken, we call binary. Unfavorable condition, there is no particular form, we call it as a multiple fission. And examples for binary is amoeba and leishmania. But for multiple, that is a plasmodium. So now second form we are going to study. The first is over. So second, that is called as the second asexual reproduction. We call it is the fragmentation. Remember the terms fragmentation. So what is this fragmentation? So the body breaks into number of units. The body breaks into number of units, smaller units, the body can be broken. So fragmented, we call it is a fragmentation. Therefore it is a multicellular organisms where the body of the organisms. So example is called as the spirogyra. So this is just like this organisms. So this is the long organisms. So this is a spirogyra. What happens? So this part gets broken. This part gets broken. This part gets broken. So in the same way, this broken part can be, again the cells can be formed. Therefore, it is a basic strategy where multicellular organisms are able to grow or able to fragment themselves, and organisms can continue their life situations during this asexual reproduction. And we call it mainly takes place in the organism starts to regenerate and they are able to form their body, and we call it is a second form of asexual reproduction, we call fragmentation. So where the organisms gets broken into smaller units and that units are able to form into another cells or another individual. Therefore this reproduction is achieved by the single cell or either to the multicellular organisms. So fragmentation example we call it is a spirogyra. And the third form of asexual mode of reproduction we call it is a third form we call it is a regeneration. So what is the term re? Re means what you know? Again. Re means again. Generation means you know. So again the organisms are able to continue. Therefore it is our ability of the organisms where the body parts. See, one part is there. If you cut one part of the body, that part of the body can grow into another individual. So one example. So I write here one organisms. So one organisms I have drawn. So this we call it is what the planaria. So just see the board. It's called planaria. So planaria you have here. You can make out 2 eyes. There is a body part and you can make. There are one organisms that is called a planaria. So what happens if you cut this planaria from here? What happens is you are made into 3 pieces. Okay. So one part you can see the anterior and the middle and then the lower part. So if you cut this one organisms into 3, you are able to get 3 parts, isn't it? You are able to get 3 parts. So one, just I make here to see this part, again this part and this lower part. So see here 3 organisms are able to get. And these 3 organisms, what happens? The 3 organisms during the process, they are able to regenerate one individual. So one single individual you are able to get. Out of 3 parts, you are going to get another 3 individuals. Therefore, the body can, when it is cut, the body start to grow into 3 individual species from the 3 parts. So first you had one organisms. It can be cut into pieces into 3. And again from these cut pieces the organisms can be grown. Organism starts growing. Therefore it is a sequence of body where the part can be regenerated. Again the parts can be grown. So we call it is a regeneration. So regeneration is by the specialized cells from the body. So from single organisms planaria you are cut into 3 parts. And that individual organisms are able to grow as a single organisms. Body can be regenerated, body can be grown, and we call it as a regeneration. So remember the first asexual reproduction, which is the fission, and second is the fragmentation, and third one is the regeneration, where the cut pieces of any parts of the body, cut pieces you have cut into 1, this part you have to cut into 1, this part you have to cut into 1, and 3 parts, and 3 single part goes into another adult organisms. We call it is a regeneration. So regeneration is a very essential organisms where the asexual mode of organisms can be taking place. So fourth we are going to study, that is called as the budding. So example, you have seen the rose. What happens rose before blooming? It will be very very small, small buds, and that buds what happens? It blooms and becomes into flowers. So what is this budding? Budding is nothing. It is the organisms like regenerative cells from the body. The bud starts developing. The bud starts growing. So example, we call it is the hydra. Hydra is the organisms which normally lives in water. ಯಾವಾಗಲೂ ನೀರಲ್ಲಿ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಆ ಬಾಡಿಯಿಂದ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ? Certain growth, certain buds starts to develop. So I draw here a hydra. So hydra will have small like this outgrowth, and this outgrowth ಏನಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ? ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು tentacles. Outgrowth ಗೆ ಏನಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ? Tentacles. And this tentacles have a small outgrowth here, and this is called parent organisms. This is one whole hydra. The small outgrowth we call it is a parent organisms. And these small organisms from this adult part, what happens? Starts the bud can be bloomed into another organisms. In the second stage, what happens? In the second stage, hydra have a what? It has the tentacles. And this bud, what happens? Slowly it goes into adult. If it is a very small, it becomes into little big. This is now parent organisms becomes into bud, And what happens, third stage, what happens, sir? So you have got hydra here. This is called what? Tentacles. And this again, this can be developed into another body part from the adult body. That is, we call it is from the adult another hydra can be developed. So this situation we call it is what? Budding. Remember, budding is a organism such as hydra. Only one organisms I have given. Hydra, what happens? They are able to grow into adult another organisms. That is, from the body a small outgrowth can be developed. That is a bud. And this bud, what happens? It mainly forms into the bigger, that is from the parent, the another organisms develops, and these organisms are able to grow into adult organisms. So we call it is what? Budding. So budding, example for budding is what? It is a hydra. Example is a hydra. So next, so another form, it is called as the vegetative propagation. What is this vegetative propagation? So there are many plants which parts like root, stem, leaves develop into new plants. There are many plants either from the roots, either from the leaves, either from the stems, the plant can be developed. For example, you take one sugar cane. ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಶುಗರ್ ಕೇನ್ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆ ಶುಗರ್ ಕೇನ್ ಕಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕಡೆ ನೆಟ್ರೆ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅದು ಗ್ರೋ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಏಬಲ್ ಟು ಗ್ರೋ ವೆನ್ ಯು ಕಟ್ ಇಂಟು one small piece and when you plant into somewhere. You take the rose plant you cut a small stem and you plant somewhere else. What happens after a few days when you water it, when you manure it, that rose can be grown into another adult plant. And you take hibiscus, that's what. And if you cut the stem and plant it to somewhere, it is able to grow into another individual. So we call it as a vegetative propagation. Vegetative, it is nothing but growing either from roots, leaves or from the stem, where the plant is able to grow into another individual, adult individual. We call it is called as the vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation. So in your syllabus they have given one leaf. So I just write the leaf here. So this leaf is nothing but we call it is a bryophyllum. So some of your houses there will be a leaf called bryophyllum. Achuma agla irutte and in some leaf there is a small, you can see their growth, and this growth here in the bryophyllum you see, and from the leaf they are able to get another plant. From the leaf they are able to get another plant, and this we call it is a buds. So from the plant, by the vegetative propagation, they are able to get another plant, and by this they are able to form into another individual or another leaf, like exact you will get it. So we call it is a vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation, where the organisms, the body parts either from the roots, stems, leaves, the small outgrowth can be developed and can be grown into another individual. We call it is a vegetative propagation. So either it can take place when you cut the sugar cane, either rose, either hibiscus, and you put it in the somewhere in the soil, and if you observe after certain days you can see the growth of the individual plants, you can see, and this mode of asexual reproduction we call it is a vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation. So last method of asexual reproduction. So last method of asexual reproduction that we call it is spore formation. So what it is called as the spore formation. So what happens? Just I will give one simple example. So you have got a slice of bread. So you get the bread from the shop and you keep in the house, and sometimes you consume it, sometimes you keep it for 2 to 3 days. What happens when you expose it here? Over this you can observe small brown patches. Brown patches you can observe in the cut piece of the exposed food. And this exposed food we call it is a spores. And you can observe either in the piece of bread or in the vegetable or in the tomato or in the lemon. When you cut it, you can observe a small pieces of spores. We can observe where that many multicellular organisms, a specific reproduction, we call it is a spore formation. And these thread-like structures which are developed by the activity of the spore formation, we call it is a hyphae. So it is called as the hyphae or the bread mold or rhizopus, and these are the reproductive parts during the spore formation. These are the hyphae or the rhizopus are the reproductive part where the organism starts growing, and this reproduction involves by the cellular cells where the spores starts to develop and they are able to give birth to the another individual. And this is some of the reproduction of the asexual mode of reproduction. So first remember what are some of the asexual reproduction. You should have the clear picture of the asexual reproduction. So first it is called as the what? It is called as the fission. And second, we call it is the fragmentation. And third one, we call it is a regeneration. And fourth one, we call it is a budding. Fourth one is a budding. And fifth one, it is a vegetative propagation, and sixth one it is called as the spore formation. So remember, first you remember asexual mode of reproduction. There are 6 cells here. Without the 6 cells, the organisms are able to reproduce continuously, and we are called it is a asexual reproduction. And second, these are some of the methods. First is the fission, fragmentation, regeneration, budding, vegetative propagation, and the spore formation. There are the 6 modes of sexual reproduction, and at least 2 they will ask for the exams. How it can be reproduced, what are the methods of reproduction, and how these are able to reproduce. So students, remember there are the 6 methods of forms of asexual reproduction.